My best friend is telling me that my boyfriend cheated with her. But he says that she's lying. How do I get to the truth? The story opens with the narrator reflecting on her friendship with Becca, setting the stage for an intense tale of loyalty, betrayal, and self-discovery. She recalls meeting Becca during college, a time when they were both figuring out who they wanted to be and what they wanted from life. Becca was the friend everyone noticed first, bold, unapologetic, a natural at commanding attention. Over the years, their bond only deepened, evolving from late-night study sessions to a sisterhood that both cherished. But beneath the easy laughter and shared secrets, the narrator begins to see a thread of dependency forming, especially as Becca's struggles with alcohol surface. In these early days, Becca's drinking seemed harmless, almost a college rite of passage. But as time went on, episodes became more frequent and troubling. There were nights she would drink too much, say things she didn't mean, start arguments she wouldn't remember. And the next morning, always, she would apologize, promising to do better. The narrator, being her closest friend, stood by her side, convinced that this was just a phase. Fast forward to when the narrator met Nate, a calm, steady influence who balanced her life in a way she hadn't known was possible. While Becca was her partner in spontaneity, Nate brought a grounding sense of love and stability. Yet as the narrator grew closer to Nate, her bond with Becca started to fray. Becca's resentment was subtle at first, a few passive-aggressive comments about how Nate was stealing her friend. Then periods of silence. Each time, Becca would come around, apologizing and insisting she was happy for her friend's relationship. But there was an underlying tension, a feeling the narrator couldn't shake. As if Becca was caught between her love for her best friend and a deep-rooted jealousy she couldn't admit. This undercurrent of resentment finally comes to a head one night when Becca calls. Drunk and needing a ride, the narrator, sick and on cold medication, sends Nate to pick her up. What should have been a routine favor becomes the catalyst for everything to unravel. Just days later, Becca drops a bombshell. She claims she and Nate were intimate that night. Shocked and devastated, the narrator confronts Nate, who vehemently denies the accusation. The story plunges into turmoil as the narrator is forced to question the loyalty of the two people closest to her. In the days that follow, the narrator becomes a detective in her own life, sifting through memories and interactions, searching for clues to validate or dispel Becca's accusation. Her attempts to retrieve messages from the app Becca claimed they used only deepen the confusion. There's no concrete proof, only conflicting stories. Nate seems genuinely hurt that she would believe Becca, and he insists that he was only consulting her friend to plan a proposal. Meanwhile, Becca's anger grows volatile, calling her a traitor for doubting her story and choosing Nate over their friendship. The narrator reflects on past instances when Becca had acted possessive or self-destructive, her struggles with sobriety often spilling over into their friendship. She remembers specific moments when Becca's jealousy was more overt, nights when she insulted Nate, accusations of abandonment when the narrator moved in with him, and even drunken tirades suggesting that the narrator owed her loyalty above anyone else. Each memory adds a layer of doubt, making it harder to distinguish between Becca's possible delusion and the truth. A turning point occurs when the narrator tries to retrieve the deleted messages. Seeing Nate's calm reaction, his willingness to help her recover any evidence, she feels a wave of relief, sensing his honesty. But despite her attempts to find closure, her relationship with Nate continues to strain. His frustration builds, feeling that her doubts have stained their bond. The narrator grapples with guilt, torn between her loyalty to her best friend and her love for Nate. To add emotional depth, the narrative flashes back to specific moments that now haunt the narrator. One example might involve a time in college when Becca drunkenly sabotaged a budding romance by openly flirting with a guy the narrator liked. Another instance could be a holiday celebration ruined by Becca's drinking, where she lashed out at both the narrator and her family. These scenes reveal a pattern of destructive behavior that has gone unchecked for years. A series of small betrayals that culminate in the current disaster. In an emotionally charged confrontation, the narrator calls Becca, demanding the truth once and for all. Becca's response is erratic, accusatory, filled with a bitterness that surprises the narrator. Becca claims that the narrator has chosen Nate over her, that she's abandoned their friendship for a relationship, and that her betrayal is unforgivable. The narrator, heartbroken, begins to realize that their friendship may have been toxic for years. Becca's dependency wasn't just about alcohol but an emotional reliance that had soured into jealousy. The story reaches its tragic peak when Nate decides he can't handle the continued strain and breaks up with the narrator, telling her that the trust between them is damaged beyond repair. The breakup is devastating but also forces the narrator to confront a hard truth about herself, her inability to set boundaries, her loyalty to people who don't necessarily have her best interests at heart, and her deep-seated fear of abandonment. She recognizes, perhaps for the first time, that her loyalty to Becca had blinded her to her friend's toxic tendencies. In the final resolution, the narrator reflects on the painful lessons she's learned. She realizes that she had been carrying Becca's burdens for too long, enabling her friend's destructive behavior out of a misplaced sense of duty. In her journey to uncover the truth, she finds a new understanding of friendship, loyalty, and self-respect. The story concludes with a bittersweet note. Although she has lost both her best friend and her boyfriend, she has gained a clearer sense of who she is and the boundaries she needs to protect her well-being. This story is ultimately about growth through pain, the courage to confront toxic relationships, and the strength to prioritize self-worth over loyalty when it becomes harmful. I'm pregnant and my boyfriend wants me to hold off on the abortion for his kink. How do I decide what to do? The quiet buzz of city life seemed a world away as she sat alone, staring blankly at the pregnancy test in her hand. The tiny pink lines blurred, and her mind felt heavy, drowning in a swirl of fear, disbelief, and dread. At 22, she had carefully mapped out her life, finishing university, finding a career that made her feel alive, and embracing the independence she cherished. Children, though, were never part of her plan. Yet, in that silent moment, she found herself holding the possibility of a future she had never wanted, a future she had been so vigilant to avoid. Her hands trembled as she thought about her boyfriend of 4 years. He was her biggest supporter, always there during her darkest days, helping her navigate the storms of university and the shadows of her mental health struggles. But his recent enthusiasm over her pregnancy, especially his strange excitement about her possible lactation, filled her with a mixture of confusion and frustration. His request to delay her abortion to fulfill his unique desires was a weight she never anticipated, and the pressure settled deep in her chest, leaving her feeling trapped and powerless. She remembered how he had once shared stories about a former relationship where something similar had happened. Back then, it had been a casual anecdote, one she had laughed off, believing it was part of a past he had long left behind. Now, though, his request took on a different meaning. This wasn't just a story from his past, it was a piece of him he was trying to bring into their present. Their life, her body. As much as she loved him, as much as she felt indebted to his kindness, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this request crossed a line she wasn't sure she could bear. For days, she isolated herself, unable to voice her fears, not even to her closest friends. She found herself walking through each day in a haze, her mind constantly shifting between love, doubt, and an overwhelming urge to escape from it all. She wondered if she was being selfish, if perhaps giving in to his wishes was a small price to pay to keep him happy. Yet deep down, she knew this wasn't just about fulfilling a simple request, it was about her autonomy, her comfort, and her values. As the weeks passed, her mental state frayed, and she fell into old habits to cope. Wine became her companion, easing the turmoil inside, allowing her to drift into a numbness that almost felt like relief. But even the wine couldn't dull the gnawing fear that this decision, this choice between her own needs and his desires, could fracture her life in ways she hadn't foreseen. The clock was ticking, and each day brought her closer to a choice that felt less and less like her own. In this state of turmoil, she found herself reaching out to an online community, her last hope for some clarity. Would they understand her situation? Would they judge her for her confusion? She didn't know, but one thing was clear, she needed help. A voice of reason, anything to help her find her way back to herself before she lost sight of who she truly was. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of her situation pressed down on her, making it harder to breathe, to think, to function. She found herself missing classes, neglecting her responsibilities, and withdrawing from friends who had always been her lifeline. The once bright future she had envisioned felt distant, overshadowed by the growing conflict within her. She had always been strong and independent, yet here she was, facing one of the biggest decisions of her life and feeling more alone than ever. One evening, after hours of lying in bed, she found herself scrolling through old conversations with her boyfriend, memories of their shared laughter, his comforting words during her hardest moments, and the plans they had made for the future flashed before her. She had loved him deeply, trusted him with her dreams, and shared parts of herself she had never shown anyone else. But now, his strange request to delay the abortion was breaking her trust, forcing her to question whether the man she had fallen in love with truly had her best interests at heart. Desperate for support, she reached out to her mother, hoping for the comfort and understanding she craved. Yet, the conversation did not go as she had hoped. Her mother, instead of offering solace, was shocked and critical. Her judgmental tone and hurtful comments only deepened her feelings of isolation, leaving her feeling even more vulnerable. It was in that moment that she realized just how alone she was in this decision. How much she would have to rely on her own strength to navigate through the storm. One late night, feeling lost and with nowhere else to turn, she decided to post her story online, hoping strangers might offer the compassion and insight she needed. To her surprise, the responses flooded in. People urged her to prioritize her health and well-being, reminding her of the importance of setting boundaries and listening to her intuition. They encouraged her to value herself above all else and to remember that a loving relationship does not come at the cost of self-respect. The outpouring of support and encouragement was a lifeline. For the first time since discovering she was pregnant, she felt a glimmer of clarity. She knew what she had to do, even though the thought of facing her boyfriend filled her with dread. She decided to take action, to reclaim her autonomy, and to put herself first. With newfound resolve, she approached her boyfriend. She expressed her feelings honestly, telling him how deeply his request had hurt her and explaining why she couldn't continue with the pregnancy. To her surprise, he listened, appearing genuinely remorseful as he realized the toll his request had taken on her. He apologized for his insensitivity, admitting that he had not fully considered her emotional needs. He promised to support her decision and even offered to accompany her to the appointment. Relieved, yet still carrying the weight of the experience, she proceeded with the abortion. Her boyfriend was by her side, showing a level of care and respect that reassured her she had made the right choice. Afterward, he suggested they take a short trip to give her time to recover, a gesture that helped them reconnect. For a while, she began to feel a sense of peace return to her life, a feeling of having regained control over her body and her future. In the weeks that followed, she found herself reflecting on the entire ordeal. The experience had forced her to confront difficult truths about herself, her boundaries, and the nature of her relationship. She realized that while love could be powerful, it should never require compromising one's self-respect or well-being. Though she chose to stay with her boyfriend, she made it clear that they needed to communicate more openly and honestly. They agreed to work on building a relationship rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Through this journey, she learned invaluable lessons about the importance of self-worth and the strength it takes to stand up for one's values. She saw the power of boundaries and the necessity of trusting her instincts, even when it felt easier to go along with others' expectations. In the end, the experience not only strengthened her but also deepened her understanding of what it truly means to love and be loved. Kicked out as a teen due to false rumors spread by my brother. My parents later see. Growing up, I never imagined that my own family would turn against me, that my path to independence would start in a place of betrayal and isolation. I was only a teenager when my twin brother, my parents' golden child, began spreading lies about me that would eventually lead to my expulsion from our home. The ordeal became the foundation of a journey I never asked for, one that would take me from heartbreak and rejection to success and self-discovery. My brother and I shared everything, or so I thought. We were twins, inseparable in the early years. But as we grew older, our parents made it clear that my brother was destined for greatness, while I was an afterthought. Where he excelled academically, I was naturally drawn to sports and friendships, an area my parents never saw as worthy of praise. As I sat on the sidelines watching him receive attention and lavish birthday celebrations, I began to sense my place in the family hierarchy, the black sheep. as they would say in not-so-subtle remarks. I tried hard to excel in school, but it was never enough. Athletics were my only outlet. Yet even there, my parents' disapproval followed me, denying me participation in sports events because they felt it was a distraction. Despite my brother's intelligence, he grew resentful of my social life. I thrived in friendships, while he preferred to keep to himself. This difference didn't sit well with him, and I began noticing small acts of sabotage. It started with snide remarks about my appearance or abilities but quickly escalated. My brother, driven by jealousy, manipulated our parents and teachers into believing a twisted narrative, that I was a bully, that I was violent, that I was a threat. The lies spread, carefully crafted and supported by self-inflicted bruises he would showcase as evidence of my supposed aggression. Even though I was the one reaching out to him, trying to understand, he pushed me further away, building a wall of deceit between us. The lies reached my school, and suddenly, friendships I'd cherished began to unravel. Peers who once laughed with me in the halls now avoided eye contact. Invitations to group outings ceased. I was alone in a crowd, carrying the weight of accusations that weren't mine to bear. I confronted my brother, pleading with him to stop. He laughed in my face, a chilling sound that still echoes in my mind. "You deserve this," he said, leaving me shattered. My parents, already inclined to believe the worst about me, took his side without question. They called a family meeting, where my brother spun an elaborate story about my supposed violent outbursts. I tried to defend myself, but every word I said seemed to confirm their judgment. They told me I was no longer welcome, that they couldn't have someone so unstable under their roof. With nowhere else to turn, I was left standing on the front porch with my belongings, watching the door close on the only life I'd ever known. The next phase of my life was one of survival. My grandmother, my only ally, took me in, and I began to piece together what had been broken. She saw me for who I was, a teenager caught in a web of lies, desperate for love and acceptance. Her belief in me became my anchor, and under her roof, I found stability. I focused on my studies, determined to prove my worth, not to my parents, but to myself. As I grew older, I found solace in writing, pouring my pain and hopes into words. Writing became my sanctuary, a place where I could reclaim my story. I began freelancing during college, working with various clients who appreciated my work ethic and creativity. The small successes started to add up, giving me a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. By the time I graduated, I had built a portfolio that allowed me to pursue writing full-time. My career flourished, and with it, my confidence. Years later, my parents reached out. They'd heard about my success, seen my name associated with well-known companies. They asked for financial help, citing family loyalty. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here were the same people who had thrown me out, now asking for a piece of the life I'd built from the ashes of their betrayal. Calmly, I replied that any support would require a public apology, an admission of their wrongdoings. Their response was one of anger. As expected, but for the first time, I felt free. I no longer needed their approval or their validation. My success was mine alone, and I owed them nothing. My journey from betrayal to triumph wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about discovering my strength, learning that my worth wasn't defined by their judgments. Today, I live a life filled with purpose, with friends who see me for who I am, and a career that brings me joy. The journey wasn't easy, but every step taught me resilience, courage, and the power of self-belief. And if there's one lesson I carry with me, it's this: sometimes, the family we choose to build is far more precious than the one we are born into. 1 hour stories for falling asleep. Evil face on the wall, unveiling a child's fear. Once upon a time, in a town marked by quiet streets and a horizon of open skies, there was a young family adjusting to life in a newly purchased house. Andrew, a caring father with a thoughtful demeanor, had always been excited about the prospect of giving his son, Luke, his own room. It seemed like a dream come true, a cozy space painted in warm colors, adorned with Luke's favorite toys and a nightlight that cast a soft glow. For the first few months, Luke had embraced his new space with joy, basking in the independence that came with a room of his own. However, that excitement quickly vanished on one seemingly ordinary night. It started subtly. Luke, who had once dashed to his room with a boundless energy, began hesitating at the door. At first, Andrew dismissed it as a phase, a minor reaction to some odd dream or a stray noise. But then, the situation worsened. Each evening, Luke would refuse to enter his room, instead clinging to Andrew and begging to stay in his parents' bedroom. "What happened in there, buddy?" Andrew would ask gently, hoping to uncover the mystery. Yet, every time, Luke deflected with nonsensical answers or distracted giggles. The once simple routine of bedtime became a tangled mess of whispered reassurances, late-night stories, and a growing sense of unease. One afternoon, Andrew noticed something unusual, a strange decorative mask, a family heirloom his wife had insisted on hanging in the hallway. The mask had wide, piercing eyes and a mouth twisted into a fierce snarl. Though it had been a simple piece of decor, Luke seemed to fixate on it, flinching each time he caught sight of it. With a surge of insight, Andrew took down the mask and hid it away, telling Luke it was gone forever. Miraculously, that very night, Luke walked into his room without hesitation, a triumphant grin lighting up his face as he proclaimed the room to be safe again. Meanwhile, across town, a man named James faced his own struggle, a marriage weighed down by expectations and imbalances that no decorative mask could fix. As a dedicated husband and father, James had spent years supporting his wife, Emily, through every twist and turn of their shared lives. He worked tirelessly, paying the bills, handling house chores, and even managing much of the child rearing, all while putting his own needs aside. Recently, however, Emily had insisted on taking a 2-week vacation with friends, a trip that would drain their savings and force James to forego a long-awaited reunion with his brother. To James, the decision felt cruel, a sharp reminder of the lack of support he often felt from Emily. Each conversation about the trip only ended in more frustration, with Emily brushing off his needs and accusing him of selfishness. One night, after a heated argument, Emily demanded that he sleep on the couch, an ultimatum that James reluctantly accepted to keep the peace. But the moment was transformative for him. He realized that he could no longer carry the relationship alone. Then there was Sarah, a strong-willed woman with a deep sense of loyalty to her family, but an even stronger commitment to her own principles. Sarah's relationship with her younger sister, Denise, had always been strained. Raised in the same household but treated very differently, Sarah had learned to be self-reliant, while Denise grew up accustomed to getting her way, often with the family's encouragement. When Denise announced her engagement, the family immediately assumed that Sarah would cover the wedding venue costs, just as she had for their other sister, Michelle. Despite her family's pleas, Sarah held her ground. She reminded them that her support for Michelle had been a choice, one that stemmed from a close bond and mutual respect. But Denise, who had often dismissed Sarah's efforts and shown little appreciation, did not inspire the same willingness. To Sarah, her parents' demands felt unfair, a misguided attempt to enforce equality where it did not exist. As the days passed, each of them, Andrew, James, and Sarah, found themselves facing difficult truths about family, fear, and self-respect. Andrew, having helped his son conquer his mysterious dread, found solace in the understanding that children's fears often stemmed from hidden triggers, not rational explanations. By acknowledging Luke's fear, even when it seemed illogical, he was able to help his son find peace. James, however, reached a breaking point. His marriage had become a burden, an endless cycle of sacrifice with little reciprocation. He began to recognize the importance of standing up for himself, of asking for the balance that he deserved. Through late-night reflections and heartfelt conversations with friends, James realized that if he continued to ignore his own needs, his sense of self would be lost. With newfound determination, he decided to talk openly with Emily, setting clear boundaries that would allow him to live with dignity and self-worth, regardless of the outcome. As for Sarah, the pressure from her family mounted. Her parents' insistence on fairness drove her to a point of exhaustion, leaving her to question the very nature of family loyalty. But Sarah had always been resilient. She recognized that family bonds could not be forced and that her worth was not defined by her willingness to appease others. After a painful but liberating conversation, she let her family know that she would no longer bend to unreasonable expectations. She chose peace over appeasement. deciding that her mental well-being outweighed the fleeting approval of others. In time, each of them found a path forward. Andrew continued to nurture his son's sense of security, guiding him to face future fears with bravery and curiosity. James, empowered by his decision to prioritize self-respect, embarked on a journey of self-discovery, unafraid to pursue happiness on his own terms if necessary. And Sarah, embracing her newfound freedom, focused on building relationships grounded in mutual respect rather than obligation. The story of Andrew, James, and Sarah serves as a reminder to us all. Life's greatest challenges often come not from outside forces, but from the choices we make in response to those closest to us. By confronting fear, seeking balance, and standing up for our values, we gain the strength to build lives filled with purpose and peace.